Before we start with the new lesson, a quick introduction to Adobe Substance Stager. As the name suggests, this software has been made for staging a 3D scene. So you're able to import an existing 3D object, apply some materials, set up lights, frame the camera, incorporate the whole scene with the background photo, and finally produce photorealistic results. Substance Stager has been created with this idea of demystifying 3D art, 3D technology in general. And so it should be useful for people who are aspired to learn 3D and also 3D professionals as well. So on the left-hand side, we have the tools palette, which is very similar to something you would see in Photoshop. So we have stuff like select tool, magic wand to select parts of your mesh, material sampler tool. You're able to draw custom box shapes and do a couple more things which we can talk about a bit later. Right next to it is the assets panel, and assets here in Substance Stager are split into several categories. So the first category are basic shapes. So you're able to create cubes, spheres. You have a text tool, and then you also have a selected a database of 3D models which come with Stager, and you're able to use them for free. Then we are able to use materials. And so in Stager, you have two types of materials. The first one is Adobe standard material, which kind of covers most use cases you would ever need. So even things like subsurface scattering, displacement, sheen, clear coat, all of that is possible to create using the Adobe standard shader. And then Stager also supports natively substance materials. So you're able to download substance material and import that material straight here in Stager and use it on your 3D model. Furthermore, we have lights. So you're able to create physical lights like area light, spotlight, and so forth. We have something called environment stages, which is a package of an HDR 360 panoramic light, which is incorporated with a backplate photo taken from the same place. And then we have HDR lights. So essentially, as I mentioned, those are 360 panoramic lights, which are kind of wrapped around the whole scene. And, you're able to get beautiful results very quickly by using those kind of lights. And so when you create a new scene in Stager, you actually start with one of the default studio lights. So if I click here on ray tracing, Stager is going to start rendering your scene. And so as soon as I move the camera, it's going to stop rendering. But when I let my camera go, it's going to start rendering again, and it's going to start polishing the scene. So for instance, if we want to change the environment light we are using at the moment, there are two ways how you can do it. On the right hand side here, you can see the scene palette, which contains all the elements in your scene. And the first one is the environment. So when you click on any element in your scene, the properties for that element are going to be shown here in the bottom right corner. So with the environment selected, here in the lights corner, we can see that this is the environment light we're using. And so you're able to change something like intensity, for instance. You can rotate your light, which is going to affect your scene significantly, as you can see. So rotate the light. And you can see that we are actually using this studio spherical panorama. So let's say we want to use something else. I can go here and then I can drag this environment light here. And then you see that the lighting in the scene has changed dramatically, which is very similar to something you have in Substance Painter. And to illustrate this a little bit better, I can go back to my models section and I'll drag in a sphere object right here. I'm going to make it bigger by using scale, holding shift to scale uniformly. And now I'm going to go to the materials section, and I'm going to drop a metal material here on top of the sphere. And so this metal sphere, since it's very reflective, is, reflecting the environment light itself. And so we can now see exactly what's happening. Because sometimes when you're using complex textures, like we are on this vehicle, you're not really able to see and understand what's happening and how the light, behaves in the scene itself. And we can actually make it very shiny. So with the sphere selected, we can go here at the bottom, we can go to the material tab and drop down roughness all the way to 0. And so now we have essentially a chrome ball. And so if you hold Shift and right mouse button, you're able to rotate the light, just like in Painter. So I kind of mentioned the properties panel, but let's go over this one more time. Whenever you click on an element here in the scene panel, all available properties are going to be shown here in the bottom right corner. So you're able to, if you go to the Object tab, you can turn on something like collisions. You can go to Transform, change the position in space, for instance. You can change the rotation, scale, size, and so forth. In case your object actually has a material applied on it, so if I click on this sphere, we're going to have an additional tag, which is called material. So we have an access to that material, which is going to allow us to change all of the properties. So you can, make it rough. You can change the color. You can even apply, textures instead of base colors. And so when we, sent this asset from Painter to Stager, it came in with all of those materials which we have been working on. And so if we expose this group here, we can see that each texture set that we had in Painter actually has a dedicated mesh. So that material with that texture set has been applied to individual objects. So if you click on any of them, in the Material tab, you can see all of those textures which we have exported from Painter. All right, and in the middle is the viewport itself, where you're able to, assemble your scene. You can tweak things like position in space of your objects. You can apply materials, do all of those things. So as I mentioned, I actually wanted to change the glass here in Stager. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to my selection tool, select the glass, and now I'm able to simply apply a glass material to this object. So I can simply drag and drop this glass straight on top of it, like this. And there you go. All right, so let's see what kind of results we can get with Substance Stager. So as you have seen, the viewport itself has two modes. We're currently in the ray tracing mode, which means that Stager is constantly refining the scene when you're not moving the camera. So when we move the camera, he's going to restart the rendering process, and it's going to refine the entire scene that you have. We are using the in-house rendering engine, and it does support both CPU and GPU. So if I go to the Render tab, over here, you can toggle the GPU. I'm currently using RTX GeForce 3090, and this is why my scene runs really fast. So the speed of the ray tracing viewport, of course, is going to be dependent on the machine that you have and the resolution of your display. So if you want the scene to run faster, you can lower to something like HD resolution, for instance. Okay, so some of the things that I can do, for instance, let's say that this is a product design. Obviously, it's not, but let's say that you're trying to render out some images which are going to go in the e-catalog. So, just very simple renders against the white background. So, very easy way to do this is to essentially click on the environment. And then we can change the background color to something like white. We can also go to the ground tab and increase the reflection opacity. Maybe you want to make the reflections a bit rough, so I can go ahead and increase the reflection roughness. And of course, you can change the lighting easily. So if you are a professional 3D artist, you have an option to create physical lights and really set up the lighting the way you like it. But if you want fast yet good results, you're just able to use some of the environment lights. And you're, of course, able to use your own HDR image. But I find that, the collection we have in Stager is usually quite sufficient. So, for instance, we can maybe drop the studio. And let's see what's going to happen. I had a little strange pop-up, but it does work. So as you can see, the whole lighting has changed. Holding Shift and right mouse button, you can rotate the HDR panoramic image and get different results. You can also go ahead and turn off the grid if it's in your way. So you can go here to the view and then show grid and just turn it off. And here in the environment under lights, you can also change the intensity of the light that you're using. So make it brighter if you need to do so. Okay, but what I really want to do is I want to incorporate this scene, this 3D model with an actual photo. So let's see how we can do something like that. So I'm going to find some images, some photos that I took. All right. So here's a little collection of photos that I took with some road, and I would like to use some of them and essentially place my vehicle so it looks as if it's sitting on the road. And let's see, what do we have? So very simple. I'm going to go with this one. So essentially, I'm just going to drag and drop this image straight into the viewport here in the background. And you can see that this photo has been plugged automatically for us. And we have a new element here, which is the camera. And so Stager now has created a camera. And when the camera is selected, you can see that this is now set to be the background. And you can turn it on and off. And if you don't want to be in this camera, you can simply click here. And now we are in the so-called working camera or the viewport camera. And you can always jump in and out from the viewport camera into custom cameras which you have in the scene. So I can jump back like this. And so we have a couple of problems here. First of all, the lighting itself is not matching the photo that we have, obviously, because we're using this studio environment image. And just to illustrate this a little bit better, I'm going to create a sphere, make it bigger, and even bigger. And I'm going to change the material of this sphere so it's something like chrome. So I'm going to go to material, change the base color to white, drop roughness, increase metallic. And so now you can understand exactly what is happening around the scene. We do have a photo, which is essentially just a 2D plate in the background. However, the light comes from this 360 panoramic image, which we can't see at the moment because the opacity is set to 0. So it's under environment, and the background opacity of the light itself, the environment light, is set to 0. So we can't see it that way, but we can see it reflected in this mirror ball. So since the light doesn't match to the photo itself, this scene is never going to look realistic. And then the second problem is that the perspective of the camera doesn't necessarily match the perspective of the photo, right? And so we need to solve those things. So I'm going to go to View and Show Grid once again, because this is going to help me kind of match, the perspective of the camera to this photo. Let's hide the sphere just for a second here. Okay. And so there are a couple of ways how you can do this. You can just eyeball it. Try to kind of eyeball this position the best way you can. You can also, if you have taken the photo and if you have the original, image file, you can go to Properties. And then you can go to details. And over here, I have the information about the camera settings when this photo has been taken. So I can read something like focal length. And focal length is 24 millimeters. So I can match the focal length of the photo to the focal length of the camera that I'm using. So I'll click on the camera and focal length set to 24. Like that. If I select the van and click F, I'm going to frame camera to my selection. And now it's going to be much easier to match this grid to the road itself. Because now I have made sure that, the focal length of the, 3D camera is exactly the same as the one we're using here in this photo. And you can see how the grid is actually matching the road perfectly. Because that's kind of the line of reference, because we can see the perspective going away in the distance. And so now we can, that way we were able to easily match those two perspectives. However, now we still need to fix the lighting. So the lighting is going to require more work. So how can we do that? Well, if you click on the camera, we have this match image option. So if I click on the match image, I have several things that Stager can do for me. We are actually using machine learning algorithm, which is able to analyze the photo, and it's going to try to match even the perspective of the camera to the perspective of whatever has been captured in the photo itself. It doesn't work every time. It all depends on the photo that's being used. But we might as well just try it, even though now I have, pretty closely matched the camera, so it looks great, like this. But we could try to see just what's going to happen. And then the second thing is that it's going to create a light out of this photo. So it's going to essentially extract the information from this photo, and it's going to create a panoramic image for us. And if there's a visible directional light source like the sun, it's actually going to create the sunlight as well. So let's just see what's going to happen. So I'm going to click OK. And there you go. The perspective is actually even better because our AI algorithm was able to, kind of figure out, how the perspective of the photo itself looks like. And so now it looks even better. And now if we turn on the sphere, turn on the visibility, you can see that we are actually getting all the reflections, all the lights from this photo in the background. And it looks much more natural. So we have the sky, we have this road, we have those trees, and of course now, the vehicle looks much better composed with this photo in the background. And then we don't need the reflections. So I'm going to go back to environment and to ground. And I'm going to turn off the reflection opacity all the way because we really don't need that. Finally, let's maybe reposition this vehicle a little bit. So I'm going to maybe rotate the vehicle. Maybe it's a little bit closer like this. Yeah, this looks pretty nice, I think. Finally, I would like to see where exactly the sunlight has been placed. So if we go to the environment and click on the lights, you can see that we have this environment light, which is essentially extracted from the photo, as I explained. And we also have the sunlight. So if I turn the sphere back on, here it is. You can see that here is the sunlight. And it's going to make it a bit more easier to read if we turn off the environment light for a second. And there. So essentially, the sunlight is coming from the same direction as the camera. We can fine-tune this by analyzing the photo because I think that the sunlight in this photo is actually coming somewhere from the left-hand side. If we take a look at this tree over here, and the clouds as well. You can see that they're actually shaded underneath, and the highlights appear or maybe on the left side. It's a bit hard to tell because I think the sun was coming through the clouds, so the photo is slightly diffused. But I feel like we can move the sunlight ever so slightly on the left-hand side. And so there's a convenient way to do that. If I go to Environment, Sun, I can use this aim lighted point. And now I can click on the sphere and essentially reposition the sunlight that way. So I'm going to move it ever so slightly on the left-hand side. And I think this works a little bit better. And also, I'm going to increase the cloudiness of the sun, because this photo originally, I think it was pretty overcast when it was taken. Maybe not so cloudy, but something like this. Maybe reposition it even more on the left-hand side, maybe like that. Yeah, I think this is good. Of course, you can also manually do this. For instance, you can change the height. Something that's more high noon, for instance, or longer shadows if it was later in the day. Or you can rotate manually. So it's your preference, whatever you choose to do. Okay, and at this point I'm going to turn on the environment light as well. As so. We can also change the intensity of the sunlight, so maybe it's not so bright. Yeah, something like that. And the environment light, we can actually increase the intensity a little bit more. So go over 100%. Finally, I'm going to go to my camera and I'm going to turn on depth of field. And so I can use this set focus point to essentially tell Stager where should be the focus point of the camera. So maybe I click here on the headlight. And if I increase the blur amount, you can see what it does. Essentially it blurs everything. But of course, we're not using this shallow depth of field. So I'm going to change the blur amount to a very low value, maybe something like 2. And let's go to View, Show Grid, turn it off. And I think at this point, we're ready to render out the image from Stager. So this is going to be our final lesson. I'm here in Photoshop where you can see the final render from Stager. And so let's do a couple of things to make this render really pop. So first of all, when you render an image in Substance Stager, and if you've chosen the PSD as the output file, you should be able to get several layers. So when you open up this PSD, you have the folder called Additional Layers. So if I turn it on, the first one is going to be Material Selection Masks. So essentially, each material that you're using in the scene is here represented in a solid color. So if you want to adjust the color of something, you can easily go to select color range. And so for instance, you can select this color and make a selection out of it. And now, for instance, you can change the hue or maybe levels, stuff like that. Very similar, we have the object selection mask. So pretty much the same thing. You can select each mesh through this layer because it's going to be colored in a plain color essentially. And then finally we have the depth layer. So this allows you to do something like, for instance, you can add a distance fog. So an easy way would be to invert and then potentially go with something like screen, for instance, like that. Or you can also use it to emulate depth of field. We're not going to use any of that for this lesson, but instead let's just start editing this image. everything that's three-dimensional is going to be stored in a separate layer. So as you can see here, we only have this vehicle, and this vehicle is in its separate